but I think it's all about the way that you look at criticism. And I have started to look at it more like sort of a helpful friend. Not always a friend you want to invite over for coffee every day if you don't have to.
I'm buzzing, let's drink up. Your death look like big fun.
Hi there. I'm Patty. I've been an artist for almost 20 years now. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about my growing and evolving relationship with criticism. Um, One of the things I'm sure you know, if you're an artist, you've put your work out there. And one of the things that we all have to deal with is some form of criticism sooner or later. And myself, I've had my share of criticism, and I've really grown to find it to be a useful tool actually to move my art practice along. And it wasn't always that way. When I first was starting out as an artist, I was very sensitive, as all new artists are, and maybe even sort of mid career and later career artists. But at some level, we're sensitive souls, artists. And so getting criticism can be very hurtful because, you're working away on a piece of art in your studio. Maybe you've worked on it for a long time. And so it's kind of like putting a little piece of your heart and your soul out there for people to look at. And if something negative comes back, it can be a little damaging sometimes. But I think it's all about the way that you look at criticism. And I have started to look at it more like sort of a helpful friend. Not always a friend you want to invite over for coffee every day if you don't have to. But if you look at criticism, or at least I've come to look at criticism with a more discerning eye, maybe a more critical eye, if you will, but to be able to see when pieces of criticism are useful and when I can actually learn something that can move on my practice. So let's consider different types of criticism to begin with. First type, I think, is criticism that you get from people that your loved ones, your family, your friends, people who care about you. And often, this can come in the form of sort of kindness. It's well meaning. Obviously, if these people care about you, they're not looking to hurt your feelings, but they might want to give you some useful feedback about your art. Now, it's always important to consider, where they're coming from and what kind of knowledge they might have about art in general or your practice in specific. Because, it's not very useful to take on outside thoughts if people don't know anything about art, or if they're talking about painting but they don't really know anything about painting. But I also think it's useful to really have someone in your corner, someone close to you that you trust enough to seek out their feedback, their criticism if it's necessary, to really get another perspective on your art. One of the things I can say for myself is my husband and I we've been together for 30 years. And, when I first started out 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago as an artist, I always found his feedback useful, because he's a person that knows about visual design and has, some good perceptions about, for example, photography when I started. But over the years, he's really gained a growing understanding of my art and where I'm trying to come out from. So often his perspective can really give me sort of a fresh set of eyes to look at what I'm doing. And I can often see things that I might not normally have seen, because one of the things about doing art is you're very, very close to the work. And sometimes you don't always see the forest for the trees, so to speak. And so having someone that can sort of see those things, it's important to get their perspective if you can. One of the things I will say about my husband is that he's not always right. And sometimes we've had very different views about a piece of art that I have made. And it's important for me. I always use my own instinct. If I, get his feedback and he tells me, well, maybe not so great. If I feel strongly about it, I don't listen. I just sort of go my own way, because at the end of the day, it is my artistic journey and my artistic practice. So that's something important to say. And he's not always right, and I'm not always right. But one of the things I do find is that if I specifically seek his opinion out, oftentimes if I'm really looking for it, it's because I'm unsure of the work, and maybe the work isn't specifically resonating for me. So that's my own feedback for myself. So that's something to consider. But I really think it's important to find someone, where there's a friend, a family member, a wife, a husband, a spouse, whatever it might be, someone whose opinion you trust that you can always go to if you need it. Because, even another artist, obviously, that would go without saying if you've got someone like that in your life. So that's the first thing. Friends and family, their criticism, and what can be made of that. The second sort of area of criticism is a place we all know and love, which is the internet. So as we share our work across social media or get it featured in different websites, inevitably there will be comments that come back that might be negative. It's just part of the beast, as you will. And so that's something I've learned over the years. Like, I started off my journey on Flickr, which is a photography platform. In case you don't know, I think people still know about Flickr and still use Flickr quite widely. But I learned a lot about photography from a lot of artists who would give me feedback quite regularly. And I found that quite useful. The one thing, though, I can say, if you start to get, your work shared more widely, you can often find yourself a little bit harassed by trolls. So, for example, I had a photo shared by Instagram. I'll put it here. And that was a great honor, no question about that. Yeah, very surprising. And I was very honored to have had that happen. But it did come with its share of negative comments. So, the thing about that is, I have learned to look at those sort of internet comments, the comments of trolls, and say, and they're not always trolls, just to be clear, but sometimes they are. And we know the difference because they can be pretty mean when they are. But sometimes you can get feedback from the internet that's a little on the harsh side, but there's actually some useful truth or reality to the comment. For example, again, when I was a photographer, I used to get my photos shared quite a bit by Photoshop. And there's a lot of people on Photoshop, on the Instagram Photoshop page, that have some really deep knowledge of Photoshop and best practices, etc. And so in amongst, sometimes very many good comments, there would be some pretty harsh criticisms. Now, some of it was just random. I'm having a bad day, so I'm going to take it out on your good fortune here. But other comments were just maybe a little bit on the harsh side, more harsh than they needed to be, but ultimately there might have been some useful reflections. And so I would always read diligently through all the comments. And if there was something that seemed to have some value to it, I would take it on board and see if I could help it, sort of use it to move my practice on. And so that's something important. But I will say, getting your art shared widely by the internet isn't always a negative experience. Again, very early on in my journey, had my art shared, to the point where it was on the front page of Yahoo. And that was like seen millions of times. And I got so many emails, like in crazy amounts of emails into my inbox. And what struck me about it was how many were positive, how many were caring and thoughtful and wonderful. And I have to say, like, there was a few bad apples in the bunch. There always will be, but it really sort of strengthened my belief in humanity when I saw that, because people had no real reason to have to write to me to say something nice about my art. So I thought that was a really cool thing. So, the internet isn't all bad. There's definitely some warm, nice people out there. I see some lovely comments, from my 52 subscribers and maybe a few more people in the comment section. And it just warms my heart every time, and can really do a lot for a person. And so, that's a great thing to have happen. So the third type of criticism that I think is important to consider is self-criticism. And again, this is a whole huge area. So I'm just going to say a few things about it. First of all, it's really important to be kind to yourself as an artist. I think that all of us are like sort of young, growing artists at heart, even if we've been artists for 10 or 20 or 30 or more years, I think our artists are always children. And I think that is where the best art comes from, is that really innocent, sort of fragile, vulnerable place that's like the inner child in all of us. And I know I do my best work where I really do it with a sense of awe and wonder, and really from a childlike perspective. And so I think it's important to be very nurturing to our own artist selves and not too harsh, and especially when we're in the process of making, because that's a really vulnerable and open place for us as artists. Having said that, I think as we grow and move on our practice, it's important to bring that kind of like, I don't know, more grown up life to, look at our art and be a little discerning about what we're putting out there. And so it's good to have your own sort of inner critic that can look more, I want to say critically, but I mean really discerningly at your work, at your own work, and say, okay, this doesn't quite work, and here's why, and this doesn't quite work, and here's why, because this does work, and here's why, and this is fantastic, and wow, awe inspiring, and here's why. And so, really have that ability to look at your own work and figure out what's working, what's not, and continue to applaud your own artistic journey. So, I think it's just really important. Just be kind to yourself, be self nurturing, but also obviously it's important to know when you're doing your best work, and have some sort of criteria for what you put out, into the world, because you want to keep moving on your artistic practice. So those are a few thoughts I have about criticism. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments if you have some different perspectives on criticism, maybe what your own experiences have been with criticism. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.
I'm buzzing, let's drink up. Your death look like big fun. Come on, let's get it on like that.